if you feel as an operator you need to treat, but they just wouldn't be in the study. I think it's going to be small numbers. I think you'll generally, if somebody really has a hemodynamic measure, some sort of clinical measure of dysfunction, you'll find a significant stenosis. But you're right, you might at some point, I mean, you could always write a little separate arm to this thing, which says, okay, they're enrolled in the study. If they have, a 30 to 50% narrowing, then you can do IVUS to characterize it, but they don't, qualify in the 50% or greater group. So you might, if you don't want to miss those, you might write a little separate subarm there to it.
Yeah, I just do worry about criticisms later that, you used angio to pick your patients. So how is IVUS really helping you? You've already picked them with your angio.
Yeah, so maybe that's a good point. Maybe you can capture that and still have your study include those patients for treatment. Not so much for outcomes necessarily. Don't necessarily include them in the 50% or greater angiographic stenosis and clinical parameter. But in the clinical parameter with the stenosis angiographic that didn't meet 50%. But where there's a stenosis that's suspected to be significant, and then you do IVUS, and then the operator treats them however. But that's more of a question of how often do you not see a very significant stenosis that's actually the causative problem, right?
So that would be the third arm of the study.
It'd be a technical arm, really. I don't think you necessarily. I mean, you can follow them for their time to initial event, I guess, if you want, but. I just think the operator's going to treat them how they best feel treating. I don't think you're going to. IVUS is going to guide that. I don't know. Think about that. I mean, the cleanest study is not to include those patients, but if you want to collect the data, they have to be included in the study protocol somehow. So that would be those patients wouldn't be randomized. Every patient with say a 25 to 50% stenosis with a clinical parameter would get IVUS to characterize the degree of stenosis by IVUS, right?
Yeah.
And then you get information about how often you underreport based on angiographic criteria.
It's kind of two studies in one.
Yeah. I mean, you've already signed the patient up for the study. Why not say, well, if your stenosis doesn't meet the greater than 50%, but your doctor's going to treat you because they feel there's still something there, they'll do the IVUS and then collect the data.
Well, then
you're comparing angiograms to IVUS on a technical basis. Just at the index procedure, the stenosis was 25 to 50%. Didn't look so bad by angio. We did IVUS and we found it was a 70% luminal narrowing that was underinterpreted because it was fish mouth shaped and you were looking at it on FOS rather than in profile, right? So it was more like a ribbon lesion, and you looked straight on at it, and it only looked like 25% narrowed, but IVUS showed that it was actually this kind of weird elliptical narrowing in cross-section, and you were measuring the biggest diameter, not the smallest diameter, and the actual cross-sectional area was much greater in stenosis. You know what I'm saying? Is that making sense?
Yeah. So we can, then, if we do want to include those patients, then we can't have the over 50% stenosis in the inclusion criteria.
Well, you
We would include it in the statistical section or in the randomization section of the
They wouldn't be randomized. They'd just be an observational reporting of
right.
a subgroup.
Right, but what I'm saying is that if we have, right now in the inclusion criteria, we're only including those with over 50% stenosis.
Right. I mean, people could, just the way they might fault you for saying, well, you did angio and it showed a 40% lesion, but how do you know that wasn't a 60? People might also criticize you, say, well, it was an angiographic 40% lesion, why did you treat it? Because that's not what's done these days.
Yeah.
Right? And you can say, well, we're doing IVUS. Yeah, but isn't IVUS your experimental group? You can't just treat because of something that you're testing. You have to treat based on the gold standard, which is angio. So I think, I'm not sure that you can actually say, okay, it was a 35% lesion on angio, and we treated it. People can say, well, that's weird. Why would you do that?
And someone might say that IVUS, you've made the predetermination that IVUS is the gold standard when, how do you know that IVUS isn't overestimating something?
Exactly right. So the gold
I don't think
standard is
that's true,
angiographic, even though we think it's flawed.
Yeah.
And you will maybe prove that